Okay, so now we know what methods are. We know what returns and return types are. Now let's talk about passing stuff into a method, which is going to come into the idea of arguments versus parameters, which is a very simple thing, but in some ways it's a little bit confusing as well. So you remember last time we have these parameters right here. But now we're going to use some in R. So remember when I said say hello, and we created a title2 string called hello all? Well, let's steal that from the main program. So we're going to pass in hello, and in this case, our title, look at that, our title says hello. So why don't we pass the word title in? And you can pass it in as hello with quotes on it, like say this, or you can pass it in as a variable. Either way works. In this case, it's going to get a little mad at me because it says say hello is under, they got the green underline there. And that is because it does not match up with this. So I'm saying pass this into it. It's saying up here, nothing's getting passed into it. Well, you know, so it's an argument, and not argument being the pun, but let's say it's a debate. I say there is something coming, and you say it's not. So who's right? Well, in this case, the code says you can't do it. You cannot. Nobody wins this debate. It's just going to throw an error. So you either have to put something in both parentheses or in neither. So when it's in this method call, it's called an argument. So arguments get passed in. They get passed in as parameters. So a parameter which can look identical, but in this case, I am not going to make it identical. I'm going to say string title2, meaning that this title2 is going to correspond to this title2 that we're returning. And hopefully that makes sense. But it may also be odd, because this is title, which is hello, which is going to get turned into title2, which is still hello, and then it's going to get passed back as title2 and change title2 into hello, which is kind of crazy, right? So now we have essentially title turning into title2. To show that this works, let's go ahead and hit start. And then I hit compute, it throws out the word hello. So hello has now been instantiated as title. It gets passed into the second title to remember the Amy question, which Amy in which neighborhood. Well, which title, this title2 in this neighborhood or in this scope is hello. And then eventually we're going to change the old title2, which is your average is found, to the new title2 from the other scope called hello. That's all that happens. Now we're going to start talking about or focus more on the important parts of arguments versus parameters. So notice what I'm doing with an argument. An argument is just simply a variable. But when it comes in here as a parameter, it has to be redeclared. And that's why parameters are different than arguments. So title2 being its own thing now is not title at this point. It's essentially saying title2 is equal to title of the button compute click method. That's really what this is saying. So it's like saying this is equal to title2, or excuse me, title of button compute. But we can't write this in. The code doesn't like this. We can't say that. It'd be not, in some ways, it'd be more telling and less confusing to do it this way. But, oops, excuse me, not title2, title of button compute. It would be less confusing to say this, but actually, in the long run, it's actually nicer to do it this way because then you don't have to type all this stuff out all the time. So really what this is just saying is pass Mr. Title and change him into Title 2 up here. Or essentially initialize him as Title 2 up here. And so that's also why we need the string as opposed to no data type down here. And everybody's happy. Now, can you pass more than one? Sure, I can pass more than one. I can pass in Title 2 here. And I can pass and call it string super title. And now Title 2 is equal to super title, which is again confusing because we have a Title 2 in each scope. That is not necessarily the same thing. And that's probably a good way to think about it, is that this Title 2 is just a copy of this Title 2 or a second version of this Title 2. They are never going to be the same thing, even though they're named the same thing. Okay, so now we got Title and Title 2, but we can actually do one more thing to this. We can actually say this. We can give it a default type. So I can go up here into super title and say, this is the best title. And see what happens here? This doesn't force it to be this. Because if I did a message box show of super title, it's not going to print this out. This is super title. What is it going to spit out? It's going to spit out your average is fine. No, it's not going to let me get away with this. Because that is what's being defined right here. And that's what's getting passed in from Title 2 into super title. So what is this for? Well, this is for if we never need this. Like, let's say I do this. And to be honest, let's do this for a second. If I set this into motion, and actually I'm going to put this outside the parentheses because that's a bad habit. Because if you notice, the end parenthesis will never get looked at. So let's go ahead and hit this, and it says this. It doesn't like this because I'm supposed to be passing 2. It's expecting 2 arguments coming in, but we're only giving it 1. So the only way to do this is with the default parameter. So now it's not passing in Title 2. And when I hit compute and I say this is the best title, shows up. Now, why would you do this? Well, there's a lot of reasons. In some things, it's just simple. Like I know, to take an example from Flash, actually, a lot of times you have these things called scenes and you have these things called frames. So you can have frame 1 in 2 different scenes, right? Because the scenes start at 1. So sometimes what you want to do is access frame 1 in your current scene. And so you would just put in frame 1 right here. And then what this would say in the super title is current scene. So it automatically just go to the scene that you're in if you didn't put it. But if you put a second parameter in there, you could put in scene 2. And now that says don't go to frame 1 of this scene, go to frame 1 of next scene. It's just little things like that that help, because why necessarily do a full call out when you don't have to? So it just makes it easier for the user and for the other programmers working with you. They're very simple, but a lot of times people get these confused, especially when you're first using the learning code, is that you should always match, as a habit, you should match the number of arguments with the number of parameters. But in special cases, now that we understand this, if we use defaults, we can use that. Now, the last thing that I'll say with defaults before we get you out of here is that defaults always have to be at the end. So in other words, I can't take this and put it here. That will not run. The reason being is that defaults always have to be at the end because they can be left out. So this one, when it's saying this title, it says, well, where should I put it? Here or here, right? We don't know. Since this has a default, then this doesn't have a default, right? So it's going to try to shove this into string super title, and then string title 2 doesn't have a default parameter. So by nature, they have to be at the end of your arguments. Well, excuse me, end of your parameters. Now I'm mixing this up. But you can have as many as you want. So I could put another default parameter after this. So I could say int I equals 7. That's fine. I've set up 2 default parameters now. They don't even have to be the same data type. They can be anything. And the same is true for all of this. You do not have to have an order, a specific order, although it does help to have, if you're working with other programmers, it does help to come up with a strategy on how you're going to do this. But you can put them in any order in terms of data type. You can put them in, you can mix and match data types. Any data type will pass. And in fact, more than data types can pass. The only rule up to this point that we're telling you is make sure that the default parameters are at the end. And that pretty much wraps this up. If you understand this, then we're going to go into the next phase, which is we're going to go in and clean the heck out of this super huge method that shouldn't really be this big. So come back for that video. And then I think you'll have a pretty good grasp on all methods.